The sun beat down relentlessly on the dusty main street of Georgetown, Texas, as Virginia Alexander watched the stranger limp his way toward the general store. The year was 1875, and like most frontier towns, Georgetown had its fair share of drifters passing through, but something about this one caught her attention. He moved with purpose, despite his uneven gait, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dirt road. His face remained partially obscured beneath the wide brim of his hat, but Virginia could see the tension in his shoulders, as if he carried a weight far heavier than the saddlebags slung over his shoulder. Virginia stood on the boardwalk outside her late father's medical practice, which she had reluctantly taken over 6 months ago after his passing. The townsfolk had been skeptical of a woman doctor at first, but gradually they'd come to accept her skills she'd learned at her father's side since she was a young girl. The stranger disappeared into the general store, and Virginia found herself staring at the empty space where he had been. There was something in his demeanor that spoke of pain beyond the physical limp. As the town's only physician, she had developed a knack for recognizing suffering in all its forms. "Another drifter?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she approached, basket in hand. The older woman had appointed herself Virginia's unofficial guardian after her father's death. "Seems so," Virginia replied, turning her attention back to the older woman. "Though he walks with quite a pronounced limp, might need medical attention." Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue. "You're not still trying to fix every wounded soul that passes through Georgetown, are you? Your father was the same way, always taking in strays." Virginia smiled. "It's why I became a doctor. Being a doctor is one thing. Getting involved with strangers is another entirely, Mrs. Patterson warned. "Especially men who look like they've got troubles trailing behind them." Virginia was about to respond when the door to the general store opened and the stranger emerged. In the full light of day, she could see him more clearly now. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his worn denim jacket. His beard was neatly trimmed, contrasting with the trail dust that covered his clothes. As he adjusted his grip on his newly purchased supplies, his expression betrayed a flash of pain. "Excuse me, Mrs. Patterson," Virginia said, making a decision. "I think I might be needed." Before the older woman could protest, Virginia crossed the street, closing the distance between herself and the stranger. As she approached, she noticed his posture stiffen, his free hand instinctively moving toward his hip where a revolver was holstered. "Good afternoon," she said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I couldn't help but notice your limp. I'm Dr. Alexander, Virginia Alexander. If you're in need of medical attention, my office is right across the street." The man's eyes met hers, and Virginia was struck by their intensity, a deep blue that seemed to hold countless stories. For a moment, he said nothing, merely studying her with a wariness that suggested he wasn't accustomed to kindness from strangers. "Appreciate the offer, madam," he finally said, his voice low and rough as if it didn't get much use. "But I'll be fine. I don't mean to pry, but that limp looks painful. If it's an old injury that wasn't properly treated, it might be causing unnecessary discomfort. I could at least take a look." The stranger shifted his weight, wincing slightly as he did so. "With all due respect, Dr. Alexander, I've managed this long. Don't see much point in doctoring now." Virginia recognized the stubborn pride in his tone. She'd encountered it countless times before, particularly in men who viewed accepting help as a form of weakness. "The offer stands if you change your mind, Mr. Nathans," he said after a pause. "Victor Nathans. Mr. Nathans," she repeated with a nod. "Well, I'll be in my office until sundown if you decide that walking without pain might be preferable to stubbornness." A flicker of something, perhaps surprise, perhaps amusement, crossed his face. "You're mighty direct, Dr. Alexander." "I find it saves time," she replied with a small smile. "Time that could be better spent treating patients who claim they're fine when they clearly aren't." Victor Nathans adjusted his hat, a gesture that seemed more about buying time to think than shading his eyes from the sun. "I'll consider it," he finally said, though his tone suggested the opposite. Virginia nodded, knowing when to retreat. "The white building with the green trim. Can't miss it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Nathans. The Silver Dollar Saloon has the best rooms in town. Clean sheets, and the owner doesn't ask questions." She didn't wait for his response, crossing back to her side of the street where Mrs. Patterson stood watching with visible disapproval. "Virginia Alexander, what on earth are you thinking, approaching a man like that?" the older woman scolded. "I'm thinking he needs medical attention, Mrs. Patterson. Nothing more." HMPH. "Well, just be careful. Men who drift into town with guns on their hips and secrets in their eyes aren't usually the kind who bring peace with them." Virginia watched as Victor Nathans made his way down the street, his limp more pronounced now that he seemed to think no one was watching. "Maybe so," she said quietly. "But everyone deserves healing, Mrs. Patterson, even those with secrets." Victor Nathans had no intention of visiting the doctor's office. He'd been managing his damaged leg for 3 years now, and though it pained him daily, it served as a necessary reminder of his past mistakes. As he secured a room at the Silver Dollar Saloon, which, as the doctor had promised, required minimal interaction and no questions, he tried to push thoughts of Virginia Alexander from his mind. It wasn't easy. There was something about her that had caught him off guard. It wasn't just her beauty, though she possessed plenty of that with her auburn hair and clear green eyes. It was the directness in her gaze, the absence of judgment he was so accustomed to seeing in others. Georgetown was supposed to be a brief stop on his journey further west, a place to rest and resupply before moving on. The last thing he needed was to draw attention or form connections. Victor set his saddlebags on the modest bed and removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the main street. He could see the doctor's office from here, a neat white building with green trim just as she described. He sat on the edge of the bed, massaging his throbbing knee. The long ride from Austin had aggravated the old injury, and despite his denial to Dr. Alexander, he knew he was pushing his limits. Still, seeking medical attention meant answering questions, and questions were dangerous. Better to endure the pain than risk exposure. After cleaning up as best he could with the basin of water provided, Victor made his way downstairs to the saloon. He needed food and perhaps a whiskey to dull the persistent ache in his leg. The saloon was busy but not crowded, with a mix of locals and travelers scattered at various tables. A piano player in the corner provided a lively tune, though few seemed to be paying attention to the music. Victor chose a table in the corner with a clear view of both the entrance and the bar. Old habits died hard, even in a town as seemingly peaceful as Georgetown. He ordered a simple meal and a whiskey from a passing barmaid, then settled in to observe his surroundings. He was halfway through his meal when the saloon doors swung open, and Virginia Alexander walked in. The piano player missed a note, and several conversations paused as heads turned toward her. It was clear that while the town might have accepted her as their doctor, a respectable woman entering the saloon still raised eyebrows. Virginia seemed untroubled by the attention. She spoke briefly with the bartender, who nodded toward Victor's corner. With determined strides, she made her way to his table. "Mr. Nathans," she greeted him, as if finding him here had been her intention all along. "May I join you?" Without waiting for his response, she pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down. Victor noticed she'd changed from her earlier practical dress into something equally modest but made of finer material. Her hair was arranged differently too, with loose curls framing her face. "Dr. Alexander," he acknowledged, his tone carefully neutral. "This isn't exactly where I'd expect to find a lady of your standing. And yet, here I am," she replied with a hint of a smile. "The benefit of being both a widow and the town's only physician is that people tend to overlook certain social conventions. I wasn't aware you were widowed." "I'm not," Virginia said, her smile widening slightly. "But the town believes I am. It's simpler that way. The truth that I studied medicine alongside my father and never married seems to unsettle people far more than the fiction of a conveniently deceased husband." Victor found himself intrigued despite his better judgment. "You're surprisingly candid with a stranger." "Am I?" She tilted her head, studying him. "Perhaps I simply recognized a kindred spirit. Someone else who understands what it's like to present one face to the world while keeping another hidden." Her words hit uncomfortably close to home, and Victor felt his guard rising. "I'm afraid you've misread me, Dr. Alexander." "Have I?" Virginia's gaze dropped to his leg beneath the table. "That injury of yours, it's not just a physical ailment, is it? It's a reminder of something you'd rather forget." Victor's hand tightened around his whiskey glass. "You're overstepping, Doctor." "Probably," she conceded without apology. "It's a professional hazard, but my offer still stands. I can help with the physical pain, at least." "Why are you so determined to help a stranger?" Victor asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his caution. Virginia was quiet for a moment, her eyes moving to the window where the last light of day was fading from the sky. "When my father was alive, he taught me that medicine isn't just about treating wounds or curing illnesses. It's about seeing the person beneath the pain. About recognizing that sometimes the wounds we can see are merely symptoms of deeper injuries." She looked back at him. "You're in pain, Mr. Nathans, not just in your leg. And while I can't presume to heal all of it, I can at least address the part that falls within my professional capacity." Victor studied her, searching for any sign of deception or hidden motive. He found none, only a straightforward compassion that was becoming increasingly difficult to resist. "One condition," he finally said. "No questions about how I got this injury or where I came from before Georgetown." Virginia nodded. "I can agree to that. Though I should warn you that the body often tells its own stories. I may be able to deduce more than you'd like simply by examining your injury." "I'll take that chance." "Very well." Virginia stood. "My office first thing tomorrow morning, and Mr. Nathan's. Bring those saddlebags of yours if you don't feel comfortable leaving them in your room. I understand the need for caution." As she walked away, Victor couldn't help but wonder if he'd made a mistake. Virginia Alexander was perceptive, dangerously so. But the prospect of relief, even temporary, from the constant pain, was too tempting to ignore. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a brief respite from the Texas heat that would inevitably build as the day progressed. Victor had slept poorly, plagued by the familiar nightmares that often haunted his rest. Images of fire, the sounds of gunshots and screams, and always the face of the man he'd once trusted like a brother. He arrived at Virginia's office just as the town was coming to life, the saddlebags slung over his shoulder as she had suggested. The white building with green trim looked welcoming in the morning light, with neatly tended flower boxes beneath the windows. Victor hesitated at the door, second-guessing his decision. He could still walk away, continue west as planned. But the memory of Virginia's direct gaze and the promise of even temporary relief convinced him to knock. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Virginia in a practical dress with her hair pulled back from her face. "Mr. Nathans," she greeted him with a smile. "Please, come in." The office was smaller than he'd expected but meticulously organized. An examination table occupied the center of the room, with cabinets of supplies lining one wall and a desk in the corner covered with medical journals and papers. "You can set your things over there," Virginia said, indicating a chair near the desk. "And then I'll need you to remove your trousers so I can properly examine your leg." Victor raised an eyebrow, and Virginia met his gaze steadily. "I'm a doctor, Mr. Nathans. I assure you your modesty isn't at risk." Despite her professional tone, Victor noticed a slight flush coloring her cheeks. It made her seem younger, less the confident physician and more the woman beneath the title. The observation was unwelcome, a reminder that he needed to maintain his distance. "Of course," he said, moving to place his saddlebags on the chair. As he did so, the weight shifted and the flap opened slightly, revealing the edge of a wanted poster. Victor quickly secured it, but not before noticing Virginia's eyes flicker toward the movement. The examination was thorough but efficient. Virginia's hands were gentle yet confident as they explored his damaged knee and the scarred tissue surrounding it. Her touch was clinical, but Victor found himself increasingly aware of her proximity, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her clothing, the way she bit her lower lip in concentration. "This was a bullet wound," she finally said, looking up at him. "It wasn't a question." "You said no questions," Victor reminded her. "I'm stating a medical observation," Virginia countered. "The bullet tore through the ligaments and wasn't removed properly. It's healed but poorly. That's why you have the limp and the chronic pain. Can you do anything about it?" Virginia straightened, considering. "I can't undo the damage that's already been done. The ligaments have healed as best they could without proper treatment. But I can give you something for the pain and show you some exercises that might strengthen the surrounding muscles to provide better support." She moved to one of the cabinets, retrieving a small bottle. "This is a tincture of willow bark and other herbs. It will help with the inflammation and pain. Take it morning and night." She paused, then added, "And stay off the leg as much as possible for the next few days. The constant riding has aggravated the injury." "That's not really an option," Victor said, reaching for his trousers. "It is if you want to avoid permanent disability," Virginia replied firmly. "Another week or two of pushing yourself like this, and you might find yourself unable to walk at all." The seriousness of her tone gave Victor pause. He'd been ignoring the increasing pain, focusing only on putting distance between himself and his past. But what good would escape do if he couldn't walk at the end of it? 2 days, he conceded. "I can rest for 2 days. Virginia didn't look satisfied, but she nodded. "Better than nothing, I suppose. I'll check on you tomorrow at the saloon to demonstrate those exercises." As Victor dressed, he noticed Virginia studying him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "Is there something else, doctor?" She seemed to debate with herself before speaking. "You're running from something, Mr. Nathans, or someone. I respect your privacy, but whatever it is, whoever it is driving you to push your body beyond its limits, is it worth the cost?" The question hung in the air between them, too close to truths Victor had spent years avoiding. "Some debts can only be paid one way," he finally said. "And some debts aren't ours to pay at all," Virginia countered softly. "We just convince ourselves they are because guilt is a powerful motivator." Victor secured the last button on his trousers and reached for his hat. "How much do I owe you for the treatment?" Virginia recognized the deflection but didn't press further. "Consider it professional courtesy for a traveler in need." "I don't take charity, Dr. Alexander." "Then bring me dinner," she said, the words seeming to surprise her as much as they did him. "Not at the saloon. My home. This evening, I have a feeling you could use a proper meal and perhaps some conversation that doesn't revolve around your injury." Victor knew he should refuse. Getting closer to Virginia Alexander meant risking exposure, risking her safety if his past caught up with him. But the prospect of an evening in her company was unexpectedly appealing. "What time?" he heard himself asking. "7. The yellow house at the end of Maple Street. You can't miss it." Virginia's smile was warm, genuine in a way that made Victor acutely aware of how long it had been since he'd experienced simple human connection. As he left her office, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully maintained isolation was beginning to crumble. And more unsettling still was the realization that part of him welcomed it. Georgetown's Main Street was busier now, as Victor made his way back to the Silver Dollar Saloon. Shopkeepers swept their boardwalks, a group of children raced past playing some elaborate game, and a wagon loaded with supplies rumbled by, its driver tipping his hat to a passing lady. It was the ordinary rhythm of a frontier town going about its day, oblivious to the turmoil in Victor's mind. He was so lost in thought that he almost didn't notice the stranger watching him from across the street. The man was leaning against a hitching post, seemingly casual in his posture, but his eyes were fixed intently on Victor. He was tall and lean, dressed in the dust-covered clothes of a traveler, with a revolver holstered at his hip and a rifle secured to his saddle. Victor's instincts, honed by years of looking over his shoulder, immediately sounded a warning. He adjusted his pace, his hand moving subtly closer to his own weapon as he continued toward the saloon. The stranger made no move to follow, but Victor could feel his gaze tracking his progress down the street. Inside his room, Victor quickly checked that his few possessions remained undisturbed before retrieving the wanted poster from his saddlebags. The face that stared back at him from the crude illustration was his own, though with a fuller beard and longer hair than he currently wore. "Wanted, Victor Nathans," the poster proclaimed in bold letters. "For murder, arson, and theft. $500 reward dead or alive." The charges weren't entirely false, though they told only half the story. The murder had been self-defense, the arson an accident in the struggle, and the theft, well, Victor considered it reclaiming what had been stolen from him in the first place. But the law saw things differently, and more importantly, so did Lawrence Blackwood, the man who'd once been like a brother to him and was now hunting him across the Texas frontier. Victor folded the poster and tucked it away. He needed to leave Georgetown, continue west as planned. The stranger across the street might be nothing, just another drifter passing through, but Victor couldn't afford to take chances. Not when staying meant potentially bringing danger to innocent people, to Virginia. The thought of her stopped him as he began gathering his belongings. He'd given his word that he would join her for dinner. It was a small promise in the grand scheme of things, easily broken given the circumstances. Yet something in him rebelled at the idea of disappearing without a word. Perhaps one night wouldn't hurt. One evening of normalcy, of conversation with a woman who saw him as a man in need of healing rather than a criminal on the run. Then he would leave at first light, before his presence could bring trouble to her door. Decision made, Victor used the tincture Virginia had given him, surprised at how quickly it seemed to ease the throbbing in his knee. He then ventured downstairs to inquire about where he might purchase a suitable offering for dinner. The barkeeper directed him to a small farm at the edge of town that sold fresh produce, and to the baker's shop for bread. The hours passed slowly as Victor waited for evening. He kept to his room, watchful of the street below for any sign of the stranger, but the man seemed to have disappeared. By the time the town clock struck 6:30, Victor had convinced himself that his concerns were overblown, the product of years spent looking over his shoulder. He made his way to Virginia's home, a modest yellow house set back from the road with a small garden in front. Lights glowed warmly from within, and as Victor approached the door, he caught the aroma of cooking food that made his stomach rumble in anticipation. Virginia answered his knock with a smile that transformed her face, lighting up her green eyes and creating a small dimple in her right cheek. She'd changed from her practical work clothes into a simple but becoming dress of soft blue, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made her appear younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Mr. Nathans," she greeted him. "I'm glad you came." "Victor," he corrected her, suddenly feeling foolish for the formality they'd maintained. "If we're sharing a meal, you might as well use my given name." "Victor," she repeated, her smile widening. "Then you must call me Virginia. Please come in." The interior of her home reflected Virginia herself, practical yet warm, with simple furnishings arranged to create a welcoming atmosphere. Books lined the shelves of a small bookcase, medical texts mingled with volumes of poetry and literature. A fire burned low in the hearth, taking the edge off the evening chill. "I hope you like stew," Virginia said, leading him to a small dining table already set for two. "It's my specialty, though I must admit that's not saying much. My medical studies left little time for learning the finer points of cooking." "It smells wonderful," Victor assured her, placing the bread and produce he'd brought on the table. "I brought these. I wasn't sure what would pair well with dinner." Virginia's expression softened at the gesture. "Thank you. They're perfect." She moved to the kitchen area to check on the stew, and Victor found himself watching the graceful way she moved, the confidence in her actions that spoke of a woman comfortable in her own space and skin. Over dinner, their conversation flowed more easily than Victor had anticipated. Virginia spoke of her childhood in Boston, her father's decision to move west after her mother's death from influenza, and how she'd fought to continue her medical education in a profession dominated by men. "Most of my father's colleagues believed women lacked the constitution for medicine," she explained, breaking off a piece of bread. "Too emotional, too weak-stomached for the realities of illness and injury." My father disagreed. He said healing wasn't just about knowledge of the body but understanding of the spirit. He believed women often possessed a greater capacity for the latter. "He sounds like a wise man," Victor commented. "He was," Virginia agreed, a shadow of grief passing over her features. "His death last year was unexpected. A heart ailment that he'd hidden from me. Ironic, isn't it? The doctor concealing his own illness." "Perhaps he didn't want you to worry," Victor suggested gently. "Perhaps," Virginia conceded. "Or perhaps he was simply doing what many of us do, pretending a problem doesn't exist in the hope that it will somehow resolve itself." Her eyes met his, and Victor had the uncomfortable sensation that she was seeing straight through his carefully constructed facade. "What about you, Victor?" she asked, changing the subject. "You've barely spoken about yourself all evening." Victor tensed, the moment he'd been dreading finally arriving. "Not much to tell," he said evasively. "I grew up in East Texas, worked cattle most of my life. And now I'm heading west." "Looking for a fresh start." Virginia studied him for a long moment. "From what? You promised no questions," Victor reminded her, more sharply than he'd intended. "That was regarding your injury," Virginia countered. "This is simply conversation between two people sharing a meal." Victor set down his fork, considering how much he could safely reveal. "I made mistakes," he finally said. "Trusted someone I shouldn't have. The consequences of that trust are following me. The consequences. Or someone enforcing them. Victor's silence was answer enough. Virginia reached across the table, her fingers briefly touching the back of his hand in a gesture so unexpected that Victor nearly pulled away. "You don't have to hide from me," she said softly. "Whatever it is you're running from, whatever secret you're carrying, it doesn't change what I see when I look at you." "And what do you see?" Victor asked, his voice low. "A good man who believes he isn't," Virginia replied without hesitation. "Someone carrying a burden that was never fully his to bear." The accuracy of her assessment was unnerving. Victor withdrew his hand, needing to re-establish the distance between them. "You don't know me, Virginia, not really." "I know enough," she insisted. "I've treated enough patients to recognize when someone's wounds go deeper than flesh. And I've lived long enough to know that few things are as simple as they first appear, including guilt." The conversation shifted to safer topics after that, but Victor remained unsettled by Virginia's perceptiveness. As the evening drew to a close, he found himself reluctant to leave, even as he reminded himself that he needed to be gone from Georgetown by morning. At the door, Virginia surprised him again by taking his hand in both of hers. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "It's been lonely since my father died. I didn't realize how much until I had someone to talk with again." The vulnerability in her admission touched something in Victor that he'd thought long buried. "I should be thanking you," he said. "For dinner, for the treatment, for—" He hesitated, unsure how to express what her kindness had meant to him. "You're welcome," Virginia said, seeming to understand what he couldn't articulate. "Will you come by the office tomorrow? For those exercises I mentioned." Victor knew he should refuse, should tell her that he would be leaving at first light. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Tomorrow," he agreed, knowing it was a promise he was unlikely to keep. As he walked back toward the saloon, Victor scanned the streets for any sign of the stranger from earlier, but the town was quiet. The moon had risen, casting Georgetown in silvery light that softened its rough edges and made it seem almost peaceful. For a moment, Victor allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to stay, to build a life here. To see Virginia Alexander every day, to watch her smile grow more frequent as the grief for her father eased. It was a dangerous fantasy, one that could get them both killed. Back in his room, Victor gathered his belongings and counted out enough money to cover his bill, leaving it on the small table by the door. He would depart before dawn, while the town still slept. It was better this way, a clean break with no messy goodbyes or explanations. He tried not to think of the disappointment Virginia would feel when he failed to appear at her office. Tried not to imagine her waiting for him, perhaps wondering if she'd somehow driven him away with her perceptive questions. Victor stretched out on the bed, not bothering to undress. He needed a few hours' rest before his departure, but sleep proved elusive. His mind kept returning to Virginia's words. "You don't have to hide from me." Simple words, yet they had struck him with unexpected force. How long had it been since anyone had looked at him and seen more than a wanted man, a criminal on the run? How long since he'd allowed himself to be seen? When sleep finally claimed him, Victor dreamed not of fire and gunshots, but of green eyes and a gentle touch that promised healing he'd long since stopped believing was possible. The sound of breaking glass jarred Victor from his sleep. He was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, his mind rapidly assessing potential threats. The room was dark, the town silent beyond the window. For a moment he thought he might have dreamed the noise, but then he heard it, the creak of a floorboard in the hallway outside his door. Someone was attempting to be stealthy and failing. Victor moved silently to position himself beside the door, his back to the wall, weapon ready. When the door latch began to move, he was prepared. The door swung open, and a figure entered cautiously, silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. Victor recognized the lean frame of the stranger he'd spotted earlier. Without hesitation, he pressed the barrel of his gun against the man's temple. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't pull this trigger," Victor growled. The man froze. "Because I'm not here to bring you in, Nathans," he said quietly. "I'm here to warn you. Blackwood's men are in town. They'll be coming for you by morning." Victor didn't lower his weapon. "Who are you?" "Name's Daniel Cooper. I used to ride with Blackwood's outfit before I realized what kind of man he really was." The stranger turned his head slightly, enough for Victor to make out his features in the darkness. He was younger than Victor had initially thought, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a scar running along his jawline. "I've been tracking his men for weeks, trying to stay one step ahead of them." "Why would you warn me?" Victor demanded, suspicion thick in his voice. "Because I know what really happened at the Blackwood Ranch," Cooper replied. "I know you didn't murder those people in cold blood like the posters claim, and I know Blackwood won't stop hunting you until you're dead." Victor's mind raced, evaluating the man's words, searching for the lie or the trap. "How many men?" "4, including Blackwood himself. They're staying at a farm just outside town, planning to take you at first light when you're least expecting it." Victor finally lowered his gun, though he kept it ready. If Cooper had wanted to kill him or capture him for the bounty, he could have attempted it already. "You're taking a risk, warning me like this." Cooper shrugged. "Blackwood's not the man I thought he was when I joined his outfit. The things he's done. Let's just say I'm trying to balance some scales." "You need to leave town," Victor said, making a quick decision. "There's a woman, Dr. Alexander. Blackwood's men might have seen me visiting her. I need to make sure she's safe before I go." Cooper nodded. "I can help. But we need to move fast. Dawn's not far off." The two men slipped out of the saloon into the pre-dawn darkness. The streets were empty, the town still wrapped in slumber. They moved swiftly toward Virginia's yellow house, Victor ignoring the protest from his damaged knee as he pushed himself to keep pace with Cooper. As they approached Virginia's home, Victor noticed a light burning in one of the windows despite the early hour. "Wait here," he instructed Cooper, approaching the house alone. He knocked softly, mindful of the neighbors. After a moment, the door opened to reveal Virginia, fully dressed despite the early hour, a medical bag in her hand. "Victor," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I was just about to leave for an emergency call at the Peterson farm. Mrs. Peterson's time has come earlier than expected." "You need to stay inside," Victor said urgently. "Lock your doors. Don't open them for anyone until I return." Virginia's expression shifted from surprise to concern. "What's happening?" "The men I mentioned, the ones following me. They're here in Georgetown." Victor glanced over his shoulder to where Cooper waited in the shadows. "I'm leaving town now, but I needed to warn you. If they've seen us together, they might come looking for information about me." Understanding dawned in Virginia's eyes. "The wanted poster in your saddlebags," she said softly. "I saw it yesterday during your examination. I didn't mean to pry, but it doesn't matter now," Victor cut her off. "What matters is your safety. I need to know you'll stay put, Virginia. At least until I'm well away from Georgetown." Virginia straightened, her chin lifting in a gesture of defiance that was becoming familiar. "I can't do that, Victor. Sarah Peterson is in labor with her first child. She's young and frightened, and her husband is away on a cattle drive. She needs me." "Virginia, please," Victor implored, frustration mingling with fear for her safety. "These men are dangerous. They won't hesitate to hurt you if they think you know where I'm headed." "Then tell me nothing," Virginia replied calmly. "That way, I'll have nothing to tell them if they do come asking questions." She hesitated, then added more softly, "I understand why you need to leave. I don't like it, but I understand. but I can't abandon my responsibility to my patient any more than you can ignore your need to keep running." Victor recognized the determination in her voice. She wouldn't be dissuaded, and arguing would only waste precious time. "At least let me escort you to the Peterson farm," he offered. "I'd feel better knowing you arrived safely." Virginia considered this, then nodded. "All right. But after that, you need to go. I won't have your conscience burdened with worry for me on top of everything else you're carrying." Victor signaled to Cooper, who emerged from the shadows to join them. "This is Daniel Cooper," Victor explained briefly. "He's the one who warned me about Blackwood's men." Virginia's gaze assessed Cooper with the same directness she'd shown Victor upon their first meeting. "Thank you for that, Mr. Cooper," she said. "I presume you'll be accompanying us to the Peterson farm?" Cooper nodded. "Yes, madam. And then we'll be on our way." The Peterson farm lay a mile outside of town, a modest homestead set amid fields of newly planted crops. As they approached, Victor noticed the lamps burning in the windows despite the early hour. A young man paced anxiously on the porch, his relief visible even in the dim light when he spotted Virginia. "Dr. Alexander, thank God you've come," he called, hurrying to meet them. "It's my sister, Sarah. The baby's coming, but something's wrong. She's in so much pain." "It's going to be all right, Thomas," Virginia assured him, her voice taking on the calm authority Victor had come to associate with her professional demeanor. She turned to Victor and Cooper. "I need to go in. You should continue on your way." Victor hesitated, reluctant to leave her. "How long will you be here?" "Childbirth can't be rushed," Virginia replied with a small smile. "It could be hours. All the more reason for you to leave now while it's still dark." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "Whatever you're running from, Victor Nathans, I hope someday you find the courage to stop and face it instead. Not just for your sake, but for your own peace." Before Victor could respond, she placed a hand gently on his arm. "Be safe," she said simply, then turned and followed Thomas into the house. Cooper approached, leading their horses. "We need to move," he said quietly. "Blackwood and his men will be stirring soon if they aren't already." Victor nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the door through which Virginia had disappeared. The thought of leaving her behind created an unexpected ache in his chest. In just 2 days, she had somehow breached the walls he'd built around himself, offering a glimpse of what life could be if he weren't constantly looking over his shoulder. "Let's go," he finally said, mounting his horse. As they rode away from the Peterson farm, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something essential behind, something more valuable than he'd realized, until it was too late. They rode hard as the sun began to crest the horizon, putting distance between themselves and Georgetown. Cooper led them on a winding path through the countryside, avoiding the main roads where Blackwood's men might be watching. "Where are we headed?" Victor asked as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek. "West, like you planned," Cooper replied, "but we need to be smart about it. Blackwood knows you're heading that direction. He'll have men watching the obvious routes." Victor nodded, his mind still half back in Georgetown with Virginia. "How did you get mixed up with Blackwood in the first place?" he asked, curious about the younger man's story. Cooper's expression darkened. "Same way most men do, I expect. I was young, needed work, and Blackwood was hiring. Said he needed men for his ranch, but it didn't take long to realize ranching wasn't his primary business." He paused, taking a drink from his canteen. "By then, I was in too deep to just walk away. Took me almost a year to work up the courage to leave. Yet here you are, risking your neck to warn me," Victor observed, like I said, trying to balance some scales. Cooper studied Victor thoughtfully. "That doctor back there, she seemed to care about you. Not many would stick their neck out for a wanted man." She doesn't know the whole story, Victor said, though even as he spoke, he wondered if that was true. Virginia had seen the wanted poster, yet her faith in him hadn't wavered. Maybe she knows enough, Cooper suggested. Sometimes that's all it takes, someone who believes in you even when the rest of the world doesn't. Victor didn't respond, but Cooper's words echoed in his mind as they continued their journey. By midday, they had covered significant ground, but Victor's leg was throbbing mercilessly, the prolonged riding undoing whatever benefit he'd gained from Virginia's treatment. As they approached a small stream where they planned to rest again, Cooper suddenly held up his hand in warning. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing to a plume of dust in the distance. Victor tensed, scanning the horizon. "How many? Can't tell yet, but they're moving fast." Cooper surveyed their surroundings quickly. "There's cover in those trees to the north. We can make it if we push the horses." They spurred their mounts toward the tree line, but as they did, Victor's horse stumbled on the uneven ground. The animal recovered, but the sudden movement sent a searing pain through Victor's damaged knee. He gritted his teeth against the agony, forcing himself to stay upright in the saddle. They reached the shelter of the trees just as the riders came into view, 4 men, riding hard in their direction. Even at a distance, Victor recognized Lawrence Blackwood's imposing figure at the lead. "They've spotted our tracks," Cooper muttered. "Won't take them long to follow us here." Victor dismounted carefully, his leg threatening to buckle beneath him. "Then we make a stand," he said, drawing his revolver. "I'm tired of running." Cooper looked at him in surprise. "That's a fight we can't win, Nathan's. 4 against 2 and one of us can barely stand." "You can go," Victor offered. "This isn't your fight. You've done more than enough by warning me." Cooper shook his head. "I didn't come this far to abandon you now, but we need a better plan than a straight shootout." He studied the approaching riders thoughtfully. "I might have an idea." As Blackwood and his men drew closer, slowing their horses to follow the tracks into the trees, Cooper quickly outlined his strategy. It was risky, but it offered better odds than simply waiting to be found. Victor positioned himself behind a large oak tree, his weight off his injured leg, gun at the ready. Cooper had circled around to approach from behind once Blackwood's group entered the trees. The sound of horses moving cautiously through the underbrush reached Victor's ears. Then Blackwood's voice, familiar even after 3 years. "Nathan's, I know you're in there. Make this easy on yourself and come out." Victor remained silent, listening as the men dismounted and spread out, their footsteps crunching on the forest floor. 3 years I've been chasing you," Blackwood continued. 3 years of my life wasted on hunting down a traitorous snake who burned my home and killed my men. "Is that what you tell yourself, Lawrence?" Victor called out, his voice steady despite the pain in his leg. "That I'm the traitor?" "We both know that's not true." A shot rang out, splintering bark from the tree near Victor's head. "You stole from me," Blackwood growled. "Tried to turn my own men against me, then killed those who stayed loyal when your plan failed." "I took back what was mine," Victor countered. "The money you cheated me out of after 5 years of honest work. And those men died because you ordered them to shoot first. I was defending myself." Another shot, closer this time. Victor shifted position, catching a glimpse of one of Blackwood's men moving through the trees to his left. He took careful aim and fired, gratified to hear a cry of pain in response. The exchange of gunfire intensified with Victor pinned down but holding his position. He was counting on Cooper to make his move soon, before Blackwood's men could circle around behind him. Just when it seemed they might have forgotten about Cooper entirely, Victor heard a shout of alarm from the direction where Blackwood had been speaking. Gunfire erupted, followed by confused shouting. "Boss! Behind us!" someone yelled, followed by more gunfire. Victor seized the opportunity, moving from his position to get a better angle on Blackwood's men, who were now caught between him and Cooper. He spotted one immediately, taking aim at Cooper, and fired without hesitation. The man fell, clutching his shoulder. Through the trees, Victor could see Blackwood and his remaining man retreating toward their horses, firing blindly behind them as Cooper pursued. Victor pushed forward, ignoring the protest from his damaged knee, determined to end this once and for all. He emerged into a small clearing just as Blackwood turned to fire at Cooper. Without thinking, Victor threw himself forward, knocking Cooper aside as Blackwood's bullet whistled past. They both hit the ground hard, Victor's leg exploding in agony, but he managed to raise his gun and fire. His shot caught Blackwood in the arm, causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain. The last of his men turned tail and ran, abandoning his wounded employer. Cooper was on his feet instantly, his gun trained on Blackwood, who glared at them both with undisguised hatred. "Finish it, Nathans," Blackwood spat. "That's what you came to do, isn't it?" Victor struggled to his feet, his damaged leg barely supporting his weight. For 3 years, he had imagined this moment confronting the man who had betrayed him, who had turned him into a fugitive. He had pictured himself pulling the trigger without hesitation, ending the chase once and for all. But as he stood there, gun aimed at Blackwood's heart, Virginia's words echoed in his mind. "Some debts aren't ours to pay at all. We just convince ourselves they are because guilt is a powerful motivator." "No," Victor finally said, lowering his weapon slightly. "I'm not going to kill you, Lawrence. That's not who I am, despite what you've tried to make me believe." Blackwood's expression contorted with rage. "You're a coward, Nathans. You always were." "No," Victor contradicted him calmly. "I'm just not the murderer you are." He turned to Cooper. "Tie him up. We're taking him to the nearest town with a sheriff's office. It's time the truth came out." As Cooper moved to secure Blackwood, the wounded man suddenly lunged for a second pistol hidden in his boot. Victor saw the movement too late, his injured leg preventing him from reacting quickly enough. A shot rang out, but it wasn't Blackwood's gun that had fired. Cooper stood with his revolver raised, a thin trail of smoke curling from the barrel. Blackwood collapsed, a red stain spreading across his chest. "He didn't give me a choice," Cooper said quietly, lowering his weapon. Victor nodded, understanding all too well the position Cooper had been in. "We still need to get to a sheriff," he said, "to clear my name." "The nearest town with a proper law office is a day's ride," Cooper informed him, looking pointedly at Victor's leg. "And you're in no condition to make it that far today." Victor couldn't argue with that assessment. The pain in his knee had intensified to near unbearable levels, and he knew he had pushed himself beyond what Virginia would have advised. The thought of her brought a fresh wave of regret. "Let's make camp here for the night," Cooper suggested. "In the morning, we can decide our next move." As Cooper set about making camp and tending to their horses, Victor found himself thinking of Georgetown, of the yellow house at the end of Maple Street, and the woman who had looked at him and seen more than a wanted man. He wondered if she had safely delivered the Peterson baby, if she was thinking of him at all, or if she had already dismissed him as just another drifter passing through her life. The night passed slowly, Victor sleeping fitfully as his leg throbbed and his dreams filled with images of Virginia's face, her voice asking him why he had left. By morning, he had made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm going back to Georgetown," he announced to Cooper as they broke camp. Cooper looked up in surprise. "Back? After all the trouble we went through to get away? With Blackwood dead, his men will scatter," Victor reasoned. "There's nothing to fear from them anymore. And I need to clear my name before I can." He trailed off, not quite ready to articulate the hope that had taken root in his heart. "Before you can what?" Cooper prompted, a knowing glint in his eye. "Before you can court the good doctor properly." Victor felt a flush creep up his neck, unaccustomed to such teasing. "Before I can stop running," he corrected, though Cooper's assessment wasn't far from the truth. They rode at a more measured pace back toward Georgetown, Cooper occasionally glancing at Victor with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Your leg's going to give out completely if you don't rest it soon," he observed as Victor winced after a particularly jarring stretch of trail. "I'll rest when I get back to Georgetown," Victor replied, his determination evident in his voice. They reached the outskirts of town by late afternoon the following day. Victor's leg was a constant agony, but the sight of Georgetown's familiar buildings filled him with an unexpected sense of homecoming. He had spent only 2 days in this place, yet it had somehow worked its way into his heart, or perhaps it was just the woman who called it home. "What will you do now?" Victor asked Cooper as they approached the town limits. "You're welcome to stay. I'm sure Georgetown could use another good man." Cooper shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I think I need to keep moving for a while. Got some thinking to do about where I fit in this world." He extended his hand to Victor. "Been an honor riding with you, Nathans. Hope you find what you're looking for here." Victor clasped his hand firmly. "I owe you my life, Cooper. Don't forget that." With a final nod, Cooper turned his horse westward, riding off into the late afternoon sun. Victor watched him go for a moment before continuing into town, his heart beating faster as he approached the doctor's office. The white building with green trim appeared unchanged, though it had been only 3 days since he'd left. He dismounted carefully, his leg threatening to buckle as he tied his horse to the hitching post. Taking a deep breath, he approached the door and knocked, suddenly uncertain of his welcome. The door opened to reveal not Virginia but a young woman Victor didn't recognize. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. "I'm looking for Dr. Alexander," Victor said, a sense of unease creeping into his voice. "Is she available?" The young woman's expression turned sympathetic. "Doctor Alexander isn't seeing patients today. She's been quite ill since returning from the Peterson farm. I'm her assistant, helping to keep things running until she's recovered." Alarm shot through Victor. "Ill? What's wrong with her?" "A fever," the assistant explained. "She was caught in a rainstorm returning from the Peterson delivery and then pushed herself too hard caring for other patients without proper rest. She's at home, but under strict orders to remain in bed." "Thank you," Victor said, already turning back toward his horse. "Where exactly is her home?" "I know it's on Maple Street, but—" "The yellow house at the end, can't miss it," the assistant supplied helpfully. "Are you a friend of hers?" Victor paused. "I hope so," he said simply, before mounting his horse with difficulty and heading toward Maple Street. The yellow house looked subdued in the fading light, its cheerful color muted by the approaching dusk. Victor approached the door with trepidation, suddenly aware of how his unexpected appearance might be received. Still, concern for Virginia overrode his hesitation, and he knocked firmly. After a moment, the door was opened by Mrs. Patterson, whose eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed with disapproval. "Mr. Nathans," she said coldly. "I thought you had left town." "I did," Victor acknowledged, "but I've returned. I heard Dr. Alexander is ill. I'd like to see her." Mrs. Patterson's posture stiffened. "Virginia is resting. She doesn't need visitors, especially not ones who abandon her without so much as a goodbye." The accusation stung all the more for its accuracy. "I had my reasons for leaving," Victor said quietly. "Reasons that no longer exist. Please, Mrs. Patterson, I need to speak with her." Something in his tone must have conveyed his sincerity, for after a long moment of scrutiny, Mrs. Patterson's expression softened slightly. "She's been asking for you," she admitted reluctantly. "In her fever, wondering if you were safe." She stepped back from the door. "You can see her for a few minutes, but if you upset her or if her fever worsens, I'll have you thrown out myself, bad leg or no." Victor nodded, accepting the terms. Mrs. Patterson led him through the house to a small bedroom at the back, where Virginia lay beneath a quilt, her face flushed with fever. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow in stark contrast to her pale skin. "She's been like this for 2 days," Mrs. Patterson said softly. "The fever breaks occasionally, but then returns. She won't admit it, but I think she exhausted herself with worry after you left." Guilt washed over Victor as he approached the bed. Virginia seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable than the confident woman who had faced him down on the street just days ago. He lowered himself carefully into the chair beside her bed, his injured leg protesting the movement. "I'll leave you with her," Mrs. Patterson said. "But I'll be just in the other room if she needs anything." The warning in her tone was unmistakable. Alone with Virginia, Victor found himself at a loss. He reached out hesitantly, taking her hand in his. Her skin was hot to the touch, confirming the fever that Mrs. Patterson had described. "Virginia," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "It's Victor, I've come back." For a moment there was no response. Then Virginia's eyelids fluttered and she turned her head slightly toward his voice. "Victor," she murmured, her voice weak. "Are you really here or am I dreaming again?" "I'm here," he assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm sorry I left without saying goodbye." Virginia's eyes opened fully, focusing on his face with effort. "You came back," she said, wonder in her voice. "But why? What about the men who were chasing you?" "That's a long story," Victor said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "One I'll tell you when you're feeling stronger. For now, all that matters is that it's over. I don't have to run anymore." A small smile curved Virginia's lips. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew you weren't the man they said you were." Her eyes drifted closed again, fatigue overwhelming her momentary alertness. "Stay," she murmured, her fingers tightening around his. "Please stay this time." "I'm not going anywhere," Victor promised, settling more comfortably in the chair despite the pain in his leg. "Rest now. I'll be here when you wake up." As Virginia drifted back to sleep, her breathing deep and even, Victor found himself studying her face, memorizing each feature. He had spent 3 years running, convinced that his past had destroyed any chance at a future. Yet here, in this quiet room in Georgetown, he had found something he'd thought lost forever: a reason to stop running, a reason to heal, a reason to hope. Mrs. Patterson looked in on them an hour later, her expression softening at the sight of Victor still holding Virginia's hand, his own exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "Your leg needs tending," she observed quietly. "And you look like you haven't slept properly in days." Victor didn't deny it. "I'll be fine," he said, though the pain in his knee had intensified to a constant, throbbing agony. Mrs. Patterson clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Virginia would have my head if I let you sit there suffering. Come, I'll show you to the spare room where you can rest." Virginia won't be waking again until morning, most likely. Though reluctant to leave Virginia's side, Victor knew the older woman was right. He needed rest if he was to be any use to Virginia during her recovery. With a final glance at the sleeping doctor, he followed Mrs. Patterson to a small but comfortable room down the hall. "I'll bring you some of Virginia's willow bark tincture for the pain," Mrs. Patterson offered, her earlier hostility seemingly forgotten. "And perhaps some broth. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days either." "Thank you," Victor said, genuinely grateful for her unexpected kindness. "And thank you for caring for Virginia." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened further. "She's like a daughter to me. Her father was a good friend, and I promised him I'd look after her." She fixed Victor with a penetrating stare. "She cares for you, Mr. Nathans, more than is sensible after such a short acquaintance. If you're planning to leave again once she's recovered, I'd ask you to go now and spare her that pain." "I'm not leaving," Victor assured her firmly. "Not unless Virginia herself asks me to go." Seeming satisfied with his response, Mrs. Patterson nodded and left him to rest. Victor awoke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sound of voices. For a moment, disorientation gripped him. The room was unfamiliar, the bed more comfortable than any he'd slept in for years. Then memory returned, and with it, concern for Virginia. He rose carefully, testing his injured leg. The pain was still present, but somewhat dulled, perhaps thanks to the tincture Mrs. Patterson had provided before he slept. He made his way down the hall to Virginia's room, pausing in the doorway at the sight that greeted him. Virginia was sitting up in bed, her color improved though still pale, engaged in what appeared to be a friendly argument with Mrs. Patterson about whether she was well enough to get up. "I've rested quite enough, Mrs. Patterson," Virginia was saying, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "The fever has broken, and I have patients who need me." "The only thing you need is another day of rest," Mrs. Patterson countered firmly. "Miss Jenkins is managing your practice admirably. Your patients will survive without you for one more day." It was Virginia who noticed Victor first, her eyes brightening as she saw him in the doorway. "Victor," she said, a smile spreading across her face, "you're still here." "I told you I would be," he replied, moving into the room to stand at the foot of her bed. "Though I'm inclined to agree with Mrs. Patterson, you should rest another day at least." Virginia's eyes narrowed playfully. "Conspiring against me already, I see how it is." But the teasing light in her eyes softened as she added, "I'm glad you stayed, Victor, truly." Mrs. Patterson looked between them, a knowing expression crossing her face. "I'll bring some breakfast," she announced, "for both of you. And then, Mr. Nathans, you can help me convince this stubborn woman to stay in bed today." After she left, a moment of silence fell between Victor and Virginia. There was so much to say, yet neither seemed to know where to begin. "Your fever," Victor started. "Your leg," Virginia said simultaneously. They both laughed, the tension broken. "Ladies first," Victor offered. "Your leg," Virginia continued, her doctor's eyes assessing him critically. "You've been riding on it, haven't you, against medical advice?" "I had little choice at the time," Victor defended himself. "But yes, it's worse than before." Virginia patted the edge of her bed. "Sit, let me look at it." "You're ill," Victor protested. "I didn't come here for treatment." "Why did you come back?" Virginia asked directly, her gaze steady on his face. Victor sat carefully on the edge of the bed, considering his answer. "Because running wasn't solving anything," he finally said. "And because I couldn't stop thinking about you." A soft blush colored Virginia's cheeks. "I worried about you," she admitted. "After you left, I kept wondering if you were safe, if Blackwood and his men had found you." "They did," Victor said simply. "But that's a story for when you're stronger." Virginia's expression turned determined. "I'm strong enough to hear it now." "Please, Victor, no more secrets between us." And so, as Mrs. Patterson brought breakfast and then discreetly left them alone, Victor told Virginia everything about his years working for Blackwood. The discovery that his employer had been cheating him and other ranch hands out of their rightful pay. The confrontation that had turned violent, and the 3 years spent on the run afterward. "Blackwood is dead now," he concluded. "Shot by Cooper when he tried to kill me, With him gone, I can finally clear my name. There are others who know the truth about what happened that night, former ranch hands who left Blackwood's employment before I did. With their testimony, I should be able to have the charges against me dropped. Virginia had listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "So you're free," she said when he had finished. "Free to go wherever you choose." "Yes," Victor acknowledged. "But for the first time in 3 years, I don't want to go anywhere." He reached for her hand, taking it gently in his. "If there's a place for me here in Georgetown, with you." Virginia's fingers tightened around his. "There is," she said softly. "There has been since the moment you limped into town." Victor smiled, the weight of years on the run finally lifting from his shoulders. "You said something to me that first day," he recalled. "You don't have to hide from me." "I didn't believe it was possible then to be truly seen and still accepted. But you were right." "I meant it," Virginia said, her free hand reaching up to touch his face. "And I still do." In the days that followed, Victor and Virginia began to build a life together in Georgetown. With his leg properly treated at Virginia's insistence, Victor found work helping the local blacksmith, his knowledge of horses proving valuable. In the evenings, he would walk Virginia home from her practice, their conversations ranging from her patients to books they had read to dreams of what their future might hold. Word came from the territorial marshal that with Blackwood dead, and several witnesses coming forward to corroborate Victor's version of events, the charges against him had been officially dropped. He was, at last, truly free. On a warm evening 6 months after his return to Georgetown, Victor took Virginia on a picnic by the small creek outside of town. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape as they sat together on a blanket, Virginia's head resting on Victor's shoulder. "I received a letter from Cooper today," Victor mentioned, his arm around Virginia's waist. "He's settled in Colorado, found work with a rancher there. Says he might have met someone, a school teacher in the nearest town." Virginia smiled. "I'm glad. He deserves happiness after helping you." "We all do," Victor said quietly. He shifted, turning to face Virginia more directly. "Which is why I wanted to ask you something today." Virginia's eyes widened as Victor reached into his pocket, producing a small ring with a modest but brilliant diamond. "Virginia Alexander," he said, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "You saw me when I was determined not to be seen. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You healed more than just my leg, you healed my soul. Will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Virginia's eyes as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. "Yes," she finally managed. "Yes, Victor." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Victor marveled at how much his life had changed in the span of half a year. From a wanted man on the run to a respected member of the community, from a solitary existence to a life filled with love and possibility. "I never thought I could have this," he confessed, drawing her close. "A home, a future, someone to share it all with." "Sometimes the things we think are beyond our reach are actually waiting for us to be brave enough to claim them," Virginia replied, her fingers intertwining with his. "All we have to do is stop running and face them head on." Victor smiled, recognizing the wisdom in her words. He had spent 3 years running from his past, only to discover that his future had been waiting for him in a small Texas town, in the form of a green-eyed doctor who had seen beyond his limp, and his secrets to the man he truly was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in soft twilight, Victor and Virginia sealed their engagement with a kiss, a promise of the life they would build together, a life no longer defined by secrets or fear, but by healing, hope, and love. 6 months later, the entire town of Georgetown gathered to witness the wedding of Dr. Virginia Alexander and Victor Nathans. The ceremony was held in the small church on Main Street, decorated with wildflowers gathered from the surrounding countryside. Virginia wore a gown of ivory silk, her auburn hair adorned with a crown of spring blossoms, while Victor stood tall and proud at the altar, his limp barely noticeable after months of Virginia's care. Among the guests was Daniel Cooper, who had traveled from Colorado specifically for the occasion. He sat in the front row, a proud smile on his face as he watched his friend take this final step into his new life. As Virginia walked down the aisle toward him, Victor felt a sense of wonder that hadn't diminished since the day he'd returned to Georgetown. This woman had seen through his defenses from the very beginning, had recognized the good in him when he couldn't see it himself. And now she was choosing to join her life with his, to build a future together based on truth and trust. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to stand by each other through whatever challenges life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in applause, the people of Georgetown celebrating not just a union, but a redemption story that had unfolded before their eyes. The reception was held in the town square, with tables laden with food contributed by every family in Georgetown. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the celebrations. Victor and Virginia moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who had become more than just neighbors, they had become family. Later, as the musicians struck up a slow waltz, Victor led Virginia onto the makeshift dance floor. Despite his lingering limp, he moved with confidence, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. "Happy Mrs. Nathans?" he asked, still marveling at being able to call her by his name. Virginia's smile was radiant. "More than I thought possible," she replied. "And you, Mr. Nathans?" "Any regrets about settling down in our little town?" Victor shook his head. "Only that it took me so long to find my way here." He pulled her closer as they danced. "Though perhaps everything happened exactly as it needed to. If not for my injury, I might never have stopped in Georgetown. If not for Blackwood's pursuit, I might never have returned to stay. Sometimes our greatest challenges lead us to our greatest blessings," Virginia observed. "Your limp brought you to my door, and now here we are." As they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by the community that had embraced them both, Victor reflected on the journey that had led him to this moment. From a ranch hand to a fugitive to a husband, it was a path he could never have predicted, yet one he now wouldn't change. The cowboy who had walked into Georgetown with a limp and a secret had found not just healing, but home. All because a green-eyed doctor had looked at him and said 7 simple words that had changed everything. "You don't have to hide from me." And in the end, he never had to again.